Sobriety is a podcast for people who are seeking or who have found a secular path to recovery from addictions of all kinds. Well, today I have a guest by the name of Jack P. He's been sober for some 45 years. We had a little bit of talk about that, which is kind of interesting. He came in pretty young, and so did I. So I kind of look forward to hearing his story. I'm sure there's going to be some commonalities and some differences. And it's just always a pleasure to hear another person in recovery's story. So, Jack, thank you so much for joining us here on Beyond Belief Sobriety. It's good to have you.
Yeah, my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me. Look forward to it.
So 45 years. Tell me about that. When did you start having a problem with? When did you first recognize you had a problem with drinking and get yourself involved in recovery?
I would say it got pretty serious around the age of 18. I turned 65 this past September, and just as a side, I always thought that people that were 65 were old. I've kind of changed that to maybe now age 80. I think
Yeah.
is old. Okay, we'll see. When we get to 80, maybe I won't think that way. Anyhow, I was about 18 years old, and I had done about 6 serious years of drugs, drinking, crime, police, jails, and then the last 2 years got to more of an emotional, painful bottom, spiritual, emotional, where I just began to think about suicide a lot, and just it was probably September of 1975 where I had a real bad night with a girl that I was dating, and I had roughed her up in one of my drunken rages, which would happen at times. And I woke up the next morning, never having a blackout when I was drinking or using, and I remembered everything vividly. And I loved this girl a lot, and I hated to hurt her. And there was one person I knew in the AA fellowship, and that was my mother, who had been 9 years sober. And I called her up and I said, "Do you think I could go to an AA meeting?" And she said, "Do you have a desire to stop drinking?" And I said, "Yes," which was a huge lie because I thought the only thing that I had left in my life to hold on to was drinking. And I went to a meeting. I think I just went to one meeting. About 4 weeks went by. I came to Florida on a trip just to get away with a friend. I told him when we got in the car in New York, I said, "I don't drink anymore." And within about 2 hours, I told him, "Well, we should drink since we're going away." And it took 2 hours for me to realize that I'm not going to be able to go to Florida and hang out for a week and not drink. And it got just about 5 days into my trip in Florida, and I had a half a can of beer on a morning, and I just told the guy, I said, "We got to go home." I knew that I was at the end. And I went back to this AA group, and the guy that was speaking was 22 years old. He had a year and a half sobriety, and I asked him after the meeting if I could speak with him, and we hang out at my house for about 2 hours. And it's kind of like the Bill and Dr. Bob story of, they were planning on 15 minutes and they hung out for 5 hours. I hung out with this guy for about 2 hours, and he said, it was, quote, "He spoke my language. That's why I got it. He got me, I got him." He said, "You want to go to a meeting tomorrow night?" I said, "Yes." And I just knew that I had to do something. I was scared. I was living in fear. I had to be high and drunk to be comfortable. If I was going a day or two without drinking, I was crazy. I didn't know how to handle life. And so that's the time where one meeting led to another, and it was November 4th, 1975, and I've been an active member of AA for 45 years. I went to my home group meeting tonight, as a matter of fact. And so been taking it a day at a time, a step at a time, and very grateful for the life that I've had in sobriety. It's been amazing.
You told me just before we started an interesting little history tidbit about your mom. Can you share that? So your mother got
Sure.
sober in...
Yeah, my mom got sober in 1966. In 1963, she she lost custody of 5 boys. She was an active alcoholic, and my dad in 1960 had to take 5 boys under his, his parenthood. And so my mom was, nobody knew where mom was throughout my childhood. So she was on a drunk up in Canada at a resort, and she saw a New York license plate. So she got all excited and ran over to the car and she said, wow, I'm from New York too. Where are you from? And they said, Bedford Hills, New York. And she, oh, I'm from Ossining. It's only 20 minutes away. And so they said, maybe we should get together for dinner. So they became buddies. But that afternoon, my mother was she tells the story. She was in the bar that afternoon by herself. The bartender said, if somebody comes in for a drink, please let me know. I'll come out. I'm going to go have my lunch in the back. So she sees the guy of the couple that she had met that morning and gave him a wave and said, come on in. And she's sitting there at the bar and she says, let me buy you a drink. He says, young lady, I haven't had a drink since 1934. And she said, what are you, an AA? And he said, well, I'm the co-founder. And that was Bill W. And the couple that she met was Bill and Lois.
Wow.
So they hung out for a day or two or three. They knew that they only lived real close to each other. And maybe Bill saw that she had some kind of serious drinking problem, but he passed his phone number along, and so did Lois, and said, if you're, if you ever know anybody has a problem, here's my number.
If you know anybody who has a
And
problem.
3 years later, my mom was drinking a quart of vodka a day, taking 3 prescription drugs, and she had one phone number in the program, and it was Bill. That's the only person she knew. So Bill ended up 12-stepping her into the program, and they became friends. Lois and my mom became friends after Bill died in 1970. So here I come along as a crazy teenager living with her because my dad kicked me out. And so when I hit my bottom, the only person I ever knew in AA was my mother. And when I asked her and I said, do you think I could go to a meeting? And she said, do you have a desire to stop drinking? And I said, yes, which was a lie because I thought the only thing I have to hold on to my world is drinking.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird question, isn't it? Do you have a desire to stop drinking? I was like you. I was young. My life was a mess. It wasn't that I really wanted to stop drinking. I just felt like my back was against the wall. I really had no choice.
Well,
I had to do something.
Well, I knew because the night, that night that I roughed up my girlfriend, that was a really tough night for me to watch what happened to her, the look of fright on her face, and I knew that I had to do something. So the only person I ever knew that I had one person to call was my mom, and my mom's only person to call was Bill W. So the fun part is that I got to be pretty tight with Lois myself. I gave tours at Stepping Stones, and she ended up coming to my first AA anniversary. She was at my wedding, which was kind of cool. So there is some family history there, which is kind of fun.
So you started off in meetings in New York?
Yeah. I was in New York for 1994. So about 19 years, I got a job to move to Florida. So my wife and my kids and I moved to Florida. I knew that with great advice, find an AA group immediately when I get down here. Don't start thinking I'll find a meeting when I get time. And I did. And I got very active in the program down here in Florida, made lots of friends, and still keep in touch with some of my friends back in New York. It's amazing. Many of them have 40, 42, 45 years of sobriety, and they're active in the program, which is kind of cool.
Have you noticed any changes? I mean, this is a stupid question. What have you noticed has changed in AA from the time you got in 75 to where we are now?
Well, I'm like not an old timer, a long timer.
Yeah.
I remember asking people like that, and AA's not like it used to be, that type of stuff.
Right.
But I had found your podcast and your presentation on YouTube, and I was very taken by the fact that I was noticing a lot of the stuff that you talk about with the people you interview.
Right.
Some of the authors you've had on, some of the programs you've addressed, but my personal spiritual growth has kind of moved in a direction of it's kind of left religion totally. It's kind of left the idea of a supreme being, and it's really moved to you could say some agnostics, some atheists. There's a kind of a mixture that I'm still
Mm-hmm.
finding, navigating my way through. But the thing that your question, the thing that makes me think about that is my concern for the future of AA, because there is a serious amount of people that aren't stepping foot in the door because of our quote religious background, which started way back in the early days. The big book was written with a huge amount of religious language. The 12 and 12 has got a huge amount of religious language. And, you know, some of the things I think about, like I work in the field now. I basically got out of the regular business world. I started my own intervention company. So I work with a lot of families that are desperate for help. And I do hear way too often when I mention, you know, part of what we're going to talk about is, you know, recovery and possibly going to rehab for your daughter or your son or your mom. And then we're going to talk about possibly, you know, will they follow up and continue in support group meetings? And they go, what do you mean support group meetings? And I go, well, you know, the place that works for me is a 12-step program, AA. Oh, no AA. They would never do that. That's a religious program. These are people who've really either never been, heard about it, or
Mm-hmm.
read about it, and they're already no.
That amazes me because so when I started in '88, I did not know that about AA. What I knew about
You,
AA is what I saw in the movies, and you never saw them praying in the movies when they dealt with an AA meeting or anything like that. I had no idea that there was any of the God stuff.
yeah,
But I've been told that by other people who got sober in the '70s, especially in New York, that it was less dogmatic, that it was less religious than it is now. And New York now, I mean, the meetings now, a lot of the meetings aren't as bad as probably they are, like in Missouri, for example, where I live.
okay. Well, I'm in the actually a portion of the Bible Belt here in Florida. I remember
Oh,
calling a pastor friend of mine, and I said, "There's all these conservative churches down here. I was looking for a church to go to," and he goes, "This was like 20 years ago when I first moved here." He goes, "You're in the Bible Belt, you know?" And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm in Florida. That's in Alabama. That's in Carolina. No.
no,
It goes all the way through,
yeah.
and many churches are like that." But yeah, so you know what, John, if you think about it, and I think about it, yeah, back and when I first got sober, it I don't know, it wasn't so much, maybe I wasn't aware, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think I did hear it as much as I hear it now. There are people who you would call very, hate to use the term fundamentalist,
Mm-hmm.
and if you ever spoke up and said, you know, I just, you know, the made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as you understand Him. That's great that as you understand Him is in there. But if you say, you know, the, well, I listened to more of their commentary, and even a guy I'm meeting tonight who I love to death. He's a great guy, and this is not a secular group. But he said that he was in a car wreck today, and actually he was in a bad accident on I-95 in Miami. And he said he watched a car go smashing up against the wall. He watched another car flip over. He watched the third car hit a rail. And he pulled over to the side and realized there wasn't a scratch on his car. And he said, you know, God just put an envelope over my car. And I'm like, I want to say to him, you really? Then what was he doing with the other three cars? And but I
Right. Why
wouldn't.
does he favor
I don't
you?
want to. I don't want to ruin his experience. But I don't think like that at all. I almost never have. But when I hear people say that, it's like, why did God take my grandson? He got hit by a car, and I'm thinking, did God point that car at your grandson, at the grandson, or did He decide that kid will hit with a car, but not that kid? And I'm like, so
Mm-hmm.
when I hear that, I really want to speak up, but I don't. It's not because I'm scared. I just don't want to ruin people's experience. So, but no, I think back to your original question. I do think back in the, I think in New York, it's way more, I hate to use the word too, again, because they put labels on things, but liberal. I think,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when I actually married, now I was married 2 years, we had our first child when I was 5 years sober, and we wanted to find a church. We were a family looking to find a church. The pastor had 15 years of sobriety. And one of the reasons we were drawn there is he was very open minded. I had never been in a church like this where it could be God as you understand Him in a church. Wow, this is cool. We like this. So I did spend about 10 years in that church before I moved to Florida, but it was a very, very liberal church, very open-minded, very accepting of people of other faiths and things like that. And, hey, if you don't really even have a God, you can come here anyway.
Right.
So it was really a cool place to be. It fit
Mhm.
me because I never really fit into a dogmatic view of religion.
Right.
But it's started to get uncomfortable in the last 3 or 4 years here, where I know that there are secular meetings now. There is conventions that have people who just say, I'm an atheist or I'm a humanist or I'm a non-believer, but I love AA. It's important.
So
So
when did you learn about that? When did you learn about these secular meetings? Because they've
I
been around
think
since 75,
I had
since
no
19.
clue,
Isn't that
no clue.
amazing?
Yep. And
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to, which I'm very happy about, because I'm still an active member of my home group. I'm in a home group that I was at tonight. I actually chaired the meeting out of the big book, but I picked something that had nothing to do with any kind of religious stuff. But I, where was I going with that thought? I'm sorry, I forgot. Um, the Again, just the people whose language talks about. I get a guy I sponsor. He's 28 years sober. He sends me a text every morning just because he loves to send these to his closest people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all a language that I just want to text him back and say, I just don't. This God that you're sending to me, but I don't want to ruin his experience. And maybe I'm saying that because I'm afraid to talk about. I don't agree with any kind of this God stuff, but um, so
Well, it's
anyhow,
interesting that so we've had these agnostic groups around since 1975. They've had them in New York. They even had them in Florida too since the
yeah, no,
1980s, early 1980s. But they all these different groups, they didn't even know about each other. There was no way for them to. They're all kind of were under the radar. I think
mm-hmm,
some of them might not have. I don't think they had like listings in their central offices that designated them as agnostic groups or anything,
yeah,
and they didn't know about each other. And it really wasn't until 2014 when there was an international convention for agnostics and atheists in AA in Santa
okay.
Monica
Was that the
that
first one?
it actually wasn't the first one. They actually had one in Chicago um, when the Quad A group started in Chicago in the 70s, and they had a conference in Chicago. I think late 70s or maybe the 80s, but it was a smaller one. Then nothing happened until 2014. But
Mm-hmm.
the big difference between the conference in the 80s or 70s, whenever that was, and what happened in 2014 is, of course, the internet. So when we left that
Oh,
conference, we were
huge.
all able to stay together. I mean, we were all
Right.
able to communicate
Mm-hmm.
through social media groups, etc. And from there, a lot of groups began to start up. After
Mm-hmm.
that first conference, and I think the growth may have slowed down a little bit pre-COVID, but I think now with COVID, you're seeing a lot more starting up online. And it's going to be really interesting if we ever go back to normal again, if those groups are going to go, you know,
Well,
in brick and
I would
mortar.
love to be. I know in my immediate area, there's not a group within 10 or 15 miles, but I did start researching that there are secular groups in Fort Lauderdale and Miami and
Yeah.
Delray Beach. So there are secular groups around, and would the day ever come that I'd join a group like that? Possibly. Is there a day like that would ever come up that I'd start a group like that in my area? Possibly. But the reason that I think it's so important um, to have these groups is because I want to be able to tell. I guess one of the great things I've been able to do is, the saying, take what you like and leave the rest. Um, I've been doing that for years in AA. There's a lot that I take that I love and it works, and there's a power in the room. The power for me is the power of the people in the room. I think you just had a podcast on about that. Um, But for me, it's when I hear, and again, in my work as an interventionist, when I hear people say, "Oh, you never go to AA," and I want to be able to say, "Why not?" Well, it's the God thing. The good
Wow.
thing, John, is that I'm learning more and more that I can send that person now to secular AA. I can put them in touch with secular meetings online. I can recommend, and I'm not sure you probably know all of this, but there's a couple of books that I'm now referring to people that are walking this path. One is the Hazelden book that is called, oh, you might know it.
Is it a walk in dry places?
No,
Is it
it's
a daily reader?
no, it's actually 20 stories from people with 20 or more years of sobriety that are pure atheists, pure agnostic, who love
I have
AA.
never heard of that. I've not heard of that.
If I scroll my photos here, because I took a picture of the book and I sent it to a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
But and then there's also Russell Brand's book.
Yeah.
Do you know that
I've
one?
not read that, but I've heard people say that it's actually pretty
It's
good.
it's amazing. It's really
Really?
good because if somebody's anti-God, I can't go to AA, they can do that. And then you also interviewed a guy that was fabulous. I sent him an email and said I'm going to order his book. Um, what was his name? I
Is it
think
Glenn?
yeah,
Glenn
Glenn
Rader?
Rader. Yeah, the modern 12-step recovery. And what he says there is that he's not doing this to close down AA. He's doing this to integrate. Can we integrate some of this thinking with AA? And it was like, wow, this is awesome. It's time for this. And
Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but I read portions of it. And I know you, and I listened to the interview that you had with him, and I was like, it's time for this. So I now
Yeah.
have a couple of different books that I can refer to people when they say, no way would I ever go to AA, because there's more and more people saying that. I also do a lot of, I study different patterns of things, but and I also am in a group, a men's group. Nobody's in recovery, but a lot of these guys are spiritual seekers. Two of them are hospice chaplains, and they keep me informed on the what's called nuns in the religious faith, NONES, and
Right.
the percentage of that is growing. And I even look at my own children now who are 40 and 37. They both grew up in the church. They both went to youth group. They both love church. But now that they're married and have their own children, neither one of them are active. I want two of their kids go to a Christian school, but they don't go to church. The kids are not involved in that. And my other daughter, she married a guy of a different faith. So I don't anticipate that they're ever going to be active. And when they say the amount of nuns, the
Mm-hmm.
percentage that's growing, so those are a lot of the people too that are 20, 30 years old. I don't know what you call them, millennials or Gen Xers or whatever, but those are the people too that when they have a problem with alcohol or drugs and they're looking for a recovery program, they're not going to have a whole lot of quote religious belief, and they're going to run for the hills when they walk into an AA meeting, hear what's going on, and look at the steps, and hear the big book being studied. A book that's almost
I
100
know.
years old.
That's the thing there. And I don't
That's
want to
my concern about
overgeneralize.
AA for the future.
Exactly. I don't want to overgeneralize with the younger generation, this the kids that are coming up in the 20s and the 30s. But my experience from what I've seen in my own group, they look at the big book and it's ridiculous. They
Yeah.
really don't want anything, especially the women. They want nothing to do with it.
Oh, yeah.
They want
It's
nothing to do with it.
it's as
I actually
sexist as
tried
you
to
can
have a
get.
meeting. I actually tried to have a meeting at our group. I regret this. And I hope nobody got drunk over this. But I tried, I thought, these we have this group. We have all these people that have never been to a regular AA meeting. They've never read the big book. They don't want to read the big book. They don't know anything about AA history, right? So I thought it might be nice for these people to have a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of history behind AA so that they can understand why we have these secular meetings. So I thought I'm going to bring out this big book and I'm going to teach it like it's history, right? So I had this meeting and I actually had lesson plans drawn up and everything and I would like it was awful. Anyway, it didn't go over too well. They did not like that book. They saw no reason to read it or study it and you know what? I don't blame them. But then I know there are younger people that think it's great. But I think that by and large, if you give somebody a book that's 80 years old, if that shit, it was 50 years old when I had it, I thought it
Right.
was old at the time,
Well,
So
that's the
if
scary thing for me. If that's still the main text that people are
it's not,
are
it's a
grabbing onto, how are we going to survive the next 10, 20, 30 years? But somebody like Glenn Rader, that book, if I
yeah,
brought that to my home group and I said, why don't we read this, and kind of said, oh, it's not AA approved. It's like, oh, whoa, we can't do that. They would freak out. Um, Actually, there was something I wanted to share with you. In the 2015 Atlanta convention, I do believe AA internationally is coming to grips with the fact that when you close a meeting with the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, which is a 100% Christian prayer,
Christian
which
and Protestant, they use the
I
Protestant
haven't,
version too.
I haven't said that prayer in a long time. Even when we were holding hands after meetings, I just kind of bow my head in respect. But the language of that is so Christian. And I have friends that are not Christian. I have friends that are Jewish in AA. I have friends that are
Yeah.
Buddhist in AA. I have friends that are atheists in AA and agnostic. So when I brought it back to my home group, that they closed all the meetings in 2015 in Atlanta with the responsibility statement, no Our Father. And I asked the group if they would consider. So we took a group vote. I think it was 15 people that said, no, we got to keep the Our Father. And 2 people said, yeah, let's do the responsibility statement in honor of people who might not pray like that. You would have thought I came in and said, let's all drink 3.2 beer because we
Right.
probably won't get too drunk. I mean, it was amazing.
Right.
The resistance, the fear, you could see it. Well, we voted again 6 months later, and it was about 11-5. And,
Hmm.
you know, so I ended up, because of COVID, with 6 or 7 guys and one gal and 6 guys. We started a new group so we could go meet in person again because they wanted to stay on Zoom and we didn't and all that. So I don't have to go into that story. But when we sat down and said, how do we want to structure our meeting? 2 things. One was, let's not read how it works because they do that in
Yeah.
Florida here and it takes forever.
It does take
And
forever, and it is
how about
annoying.
we close the meeting in honor of people who are not Christians? Why don't we do like they did in the 2015 convention? Close the meeting with the responsibility statement. And all 6 of these people said, yeah, I'm in with that. So now my new home group, we read the responsibility statement at the end. There is no Our Father. One woman got really offended when she came for the first time and said, how come you don't say the Lord's Prayer?
Oh,
And I told
wow.
her, I said, we're trying to respect everybody who might be of a different faith or maybe an agnostic or an atheist. It's not really fair, do you think, to be able to have, and people are going to run for the hills that don't hear it that way, which is a lot of people. So
Yeah, they
we
will.
need to so the responsibility statement is now read, which is phenomenal because it's really there's no language in that can turn anybody off other than we want the hand of AA to be there when needed. So
Yeah. So,
that's
Jack,
I
what
think, and
got you?
that was AA's. Somehow somebody sat down in 2013 when they were planning the
Yeah.
Atlanta convention, and somebody must have said, maybe we shouldn't close with the Our Father. So
I have a sense that the General Service Office of AA would like to move the fellowship a little bit more into away from the dogmatic religious language and so forth.
yeah, yeah,
But I think sometimes they're afraid of the general fellowship, and dealing with
it's
it. And
huge.
plus,
It's here is a big
AA
thing.
and the way AA is set up anyway, it's really kind of decentralized. There is no person who can say we're going to start doing things one way. I mean, that's just not the way it is. But yeah, I have it. Was it the Grapevine? It seems I think it was the Grapevine that came out with an article, or maybe it was I read something. Maybe it was in one of the um, newsletters that GSO prints out. But they had a question about the Lord's Prayer and the reading of how it works. And the question was, would you blame somebody for thinking that we're a religious organization? You know, if this is what their first time in the meeting, and you're telling them there is one who has all power, that one is God, may you find him now, and then you close by holding hands and praying.
Right. And
You know,
God could and would if you were taught.
yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, I can't remember when that was, but I've seen little movements here
Well,
and there.
the grapevine is moving a little bit, as well as I think I agree with you. I think the fellowship in general knows that something has to be done. But
Yeah,
boy, is it scary! It's fear. I
it
just
is.
thought of the
They're
book. I
talking
just
about
thought of the
toying
book.
with the big book, which is a mistake. They're talking about toying with the big book. Maybe we should modernize the language or whatever. No, just leave it alone. Start something new if you're going to do that.
Yeah,
As far as I'm
yeah.
concerned.
I just thought of the book, John. It was Hazelden. It was a compilation of 20 people who wrote to the grapevine, and they compiled these stories and put it in a book called One Big Tent. And
Oh, okay, I know that book. Yeah, that
it's
book was that
available
book.
at Hazelden. And it's amazing how many people flat out, I've never been a
That's a
believer.
grapevine book.
Yeah, it's grapevine. And so I've shared this with people and they're like shocked, like, wow, this guy's got 40 years and he's been an atheist since his first day of recovery.
Yep.
But the idea that they can still stay in AA, still go to the meetings, and that's what I've been doing. It's kind of like, it's okay. I'm still comfortable in what I get out of AA, but will I switch to secular down the road when COVID's over? There's a great chance I'm gonna travel around and especially because I'm gonna be retired soon.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try some of these meetings. I want to fellowship with some people that, but I mean, just the fellow tonight that told that story about God put a cover over his car.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what about the three other cars that like totally smashed up? I'd like, what was God up there pointing the car, pointing? And there's a
I'm
lot of people that
curious.
believe that way.
I'm curious, Jack. When did you begin going down this road, questioning the all of this and becoming interested in a secular
I would say
way
the
of?
the the interest really strong has been since I've had a little more YouTube time and website time in the last year and a half.
Okay.
When have I ever been thinking that I don't buy into all of the religious language in AA? That goes back for years and years and years. I mean,
Yeah.
like ever since I was maybe a couple years sober and I started going, it's he in the big book. Everything is he. That's weird. And yeah, God could and would if he were sought. So what about somebody who doesn't believe in God? I had
Yeah.
always been thinking that, but my personal journey has done a shift in the last like year and a half that I still love AA. I still love
Sure.
fellowshipping with people in the program. I still have great friends that are quote believers. Great friends. I mean, deep heart to heart
Sure.
friendships. But would I like to fellowship with some people that are secular and that people who see the program in that way? Yes, I would. Am I ready to go to a convention? Not sure,
Right.
but there's some groups around here. I know there's probably within 30 miles of me, probably 6 or 8 groups that I found. Just went on a search and I went, wow, there's a whole bunch of secular groups around here. Again, with COVID, it's kind of thrown a
Yeah.
little of that off.
Yeah. My background is I didn't grow up in a religion at all. My parents are actually originally from Florida, and so they grew up in the Baptist church.
Oh boy.
But when my father joined the army and they left Florida, they never looked back. And I think when my dad came back from Vietnam, that was the end of church for us. And so I grew up without any religion whatsoever, and I knew nothing about it. I did take a class to learn something about it. I took a class in a community college, but when I got to AA and I was hearing all this bizarre stuff, and the group that I went to was um, mostly Catholic people, and they were kind of used to all this kind of stuff. I did feel a bit like of an outsider, but in my own brain, I was interpreting this stuff. I think subconsciously, but I was just trying to figure it out on my own, and and it wasn't for another 25 years that I was able to come out openly and tell people, no, this is what I think, and I am an atheist. And that was a different deal. But for a long time, I didn't push anybody in the group, and I just kind of kept it internalized everything. But I want to also ask you, Jack, about interventions and and the people that you're meeting and how that might have impacted you too. But can you tell me a little bit about an intervention? I've never actually spoken with an interventionist before.
Well, I was certified and trained about 10 years ago when I left the business world. And I researched the various different types of interventions because I knew that there were different kinds. And when I found the one that I liked, that's where I went and got trained. And it's called ARISE Intervention. So there's three things that are way different than what people see on cable TV or Dr. Phil. The first is it's an invitational model. So the addict, alcoholic is invited to attend a family meeting. So they're not shocked or surprised. There's no ambush, and they can choose
Okay,
to
they
come,
know
or they can choose to come or not, because if they don't, the family is already committed that they're ready to start working on a whole new process to be able to learn how to live their life, learn how to stop enabling, learn how to change the rules in the
the
family. Because
family's already decided they're going to change.
right,
So
right,
when you invite the addict or the alcoholic, they know when they're going into it that they're going to be
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
their
So,
drinking.
well, but I also train the family on how to say, after they take 10 minutes, the mom and dad's on the phone and they tell me how destroyed their son is, and they're afraid he's going to die, and he got arrested. And, when he was 12, they found pot in his room, and then it goes all the way to now the kid's 24. I say, do you mind if I stop you for a second? And they go, yeah, what do you mean? And I say, Mom, let me start with you. How are you doing? And I swear, John, 50% or more start crying immediately, and they don't even know
Oh,
me. They just got my name from a referred therapist or treatment center or something like that. And mom will start crying and going, I lay awake at night. She didn't come home again. I'm afraid this is it. She's going to be dead. And the mom is crying. And then I say to dad, Dad, how are you feeling? What can you tell me about you, not your daughter? Because you guys could probably talk for another hour about your daughter. And dad will start talking, and he's either really hurting or he's really angry. And then I said, well, how are you two doing together? And they said, we're not doing good at all because my wife wants to do this, which is totally different than what I think we should be doing. And I say, are there any other children in your family? And they say, well, our daughter's at college in Orlando. Well, how's she doing? Oh, she's so enraged with her sister. She doesn't even want to come home anymore. And that's what ARISE is, because the second part of, I told you it's invitational, but it's also focused on the whole family. Once we get to that point, I say, it sounds like all of you guys could use some help. And after they've told me that and they're crying and they're angry, they go, "You're right. We all need help."
wow.
And that's this type of intervention, because you're not really focusing on the addict, you're focusing on the family. The family is the patient. And
Sure.
that's the difference in this training. And then they have to commit to a 6-month process of working together for 6 months. We're not
The
going to come
family
in and
does?
yep. We're not going to come in and ambush your daughter and get her into a rehab and say, "All right, good job. Good luck to you people." No, we have to go down this path while your daughter's in rehab, if she goes, or when she starts going to meetings. Mom and dad are going to have to be going to Al Anon. They're going to have to be reading certain books that I've been giving them. They're going to have to start their own yoga practice or prayer and meditation practice, whatever. I give them choices and say, you choose, but you need to do some stuff for yourself and leave your daughter alone. You're not going to, you're powerless. I'll go back to step one and I'll say, you're
Mhm.
powerless over whether she gets clean or not. So let's get to work on you guys. And you're going to help your daughter because she's going to realize that you're working on yourself, that it's not just about her. Because I hold everybody accountable in these things for 6 months. If mom starts talking about the daughter, I'll say, hey, mom, you're having a slip. What do you mean? Well, you're focused on your daughter. How was your Al Anon meeting last night? The book that you're reading, Codependent No More, Chapter 5. What is in that book? You told me you read chapter 5 last week, remember? So I'm holding mom accountable to do her own work. So this type of intervention is very different. The old-fashioned model was you meet the family Friday night, you get rid of the addict somewhere, you make them write letters that have consequences, and then the next day they say it's grandma's birthday party, and the girl walks in and it's not grandma's birthday party, it's her intervention with some strange dude like me sitting in a chair going, welcome, could you sit down, your family wants to talk to you. It's done in love and transparency and openness, not deceit and lying and sneaking to get that person to come in a room. So it's very different. It's called ARISE.
Yeah,
I'm a big disciple of that model, because sometimes the addict is the last one to come aboard. The family starts getting better.
sure.
You start shifting the family
Wow.
and
That
teaching
would be
them little.
gratifying to
Yeah, it's
see that.
amazing. There's little things like you get the family to commit that they will never get in a one-on-one argument with the addict anymore, because usually the addict will go to the weak link to ask for money, to pay for my car payment, to whatever it is. And now mom has, if it's mom, sorry to say, maybe it's dad. You know what?
Sure.
I can't make this decision because the network. I have to check with the network. Jack, our interventionist, not our interventionist, Jack, the guy who's working with us, told me I can't make decisions without checking with the whole group. So she's off the hook. She doesn't have to say, because the rule is if you argue with an addict, you'll lose. One-on-one, you'll
Yeah.
always lose. So if you say, listen, I can't make a decision. I made an agreement with our group that I can't make a decision without talking to them. So I'll get back to you.
So
Let me talk to the group.
so do you get the
It's cool.
family do you get the family in a position where they're somewhat stabilized before you send the invitation out to the addict?
No, because it all starts at the first time that we get together in person. But sometimes the addict won't show.
Gotcha.
And, it's 40% of the time, we have statistics for this that have been done. 40% of the time they come because they're ready to get help and they know what's happening and they've been
Yes.
told who I am and that I'm coming to help the family.
I wish that
40% of the
I
time,
wish that they knew how lucky they were that their family cared enough to do that.
yeah,
They don't
yeah, that's
realize that
huge.
though.
Yeah,
I'm
then
sorry I
there's
interrupted you.
40%. No, it's okay. And then 40% of the time they come because they want to argue their case that you guys are all nuts and I'm fine. And then
Yeah.
20% of the time they don't come. And I have to get the family to realize if your loved one does not come, they can call me and say, what are you doing with my family Saturday at 3 o'clock? They told me you're coming to meet with us. So they can call me. They can give your mom my number, give your son my number. And they do call once in a while, but and I say, you have to be ready. The fact, if he doesn't come, we are going to meet for that first meeting. It's part workshop, part getting people to make commitments to make major changes in their life, no matter who they are in the family. And then we're going to every week have a Zoom call. It's now Zoom, it used to be phone. And we're going to invite your son who didn't come, and we're going to invite him to come. Each week we meet, and if he doesn't show up, we're still working on your process. It's fabulous the way it works.
I like
And
it. What's it called
so some
again? You
ARISE, ARISE. It can be Googled, ARISE
Arise.
Intervention. And, I can put my website up there if anybody wants to learn more there. It's not a plug for that, but why not?
Sure.
But it's really so different, John, than the other type of model. But there
Yeah.
is there is a period, say 2 months goes by, and it doesn't happen very often. At 80% of the time, the addict does come. And if they don't come the first meeting, they show up at the second meeting. But about 2 months down the road, the family has to make a decision. Do we want to now go to what's called phase three, which is the original intervention, which is writing the letter and it has consequences. And it
So you
could
do
be
get to
the,
that
the,
point.
the wife that says, you have decided not to participate in what we're doing in our recovery for our family. And so I'm deciding that I'm going to move out and get a separation. Or I'm deciding that you're not going to be able to see your grandkids until further notice. Or we're deciding that your job is in you're not going to have your job unless you go to treatment. So that can happen about 2 months down the road. And family as a group makes a decision to whether they think it's time because the loved one has decided, screw you people, do what you want, but I'm not going to be a part of this. So then they get a letter with consequences. I help them write those letters. I have templates that they use to put those letters together. Basically, how much they love that person, but based on what we've known of your history, and we're all working on ourselves, and you choose not to be a part of this. So, because of your choices, this is what we're choosing to do. And it's really based on choices. It's nobody forces anybody to do anything, which again is an ARISE thing. The old fashioned model, that person goes to rehab because they're forced and coerced.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks later, 70% of them, John, leave because they're so pissed off at their family for lying to them, for ambushing them. And but the ARISE model, less than 2% leave treatment because they're just asked to go to treatment. I do that part. And I say, I'm going to suggest that you take 90 days and go to a treatment program. And sometimes they say yes before I finish asking. Other
Hmm.
times they'll fight me, fight me, fight me. I might say to one of the family members, well, what do you think? Do you think rehab would help her? And so it's all based on letting that person make the decision. If they say no,
Yeah.
it then goes to what about an outpatient program? How about you consider that? And a lot of them will go, oh, I'll do that, but I'm not going to a rehab. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great. It's their decision. And sometimes it gets to the point, would you just try 3 AA meetings a week or NA meetings a week? Um, and they'll agree to that, but they don't want to go to a rehab or an outpatient. So the cool thing is that I build a bridge. I try to in that 2 or 3 hour meeting And one time this happened, and I don't want to take too much time talking about this, but the one young man, basically in the middle of the intervention, I always make it a point to meet with them one on one when we take a break to check your texts or have a smoke or whatever you're going to do. And I'll go out on the porch and I'll meet with this 25-year-old kid and I'll say, look, I was right where you were many years ago. You're really brave that you showed up for this. Here's my phone number, and I put it on a separate piece of paper. I don't give them a business card. If you ever think that you want to talk to me one on one, here's my number. Call me. I'm here to help you. And so it builds that bridge. Well, this one kid, after he agreed to go to NA 3 nights a week for 90 days, the whole family agreed to do their things and he agreed to do this. He called me 3 days later and he said, Jack, I know that this isn't going to work. I got to go to rehab. Can you help me find a good program? So, you know, you never know how it's going to unfold. It kind of makes the work exciting, but scary at the same time because you don't really know how it's going to, when it's going to come down the pike. There's been one or two that I've been in where I'm in the middle of it, and I never share this with anybody, but I'll tell you, I go, oh man, I'm a little in over my head on this one.
Wow.
Because dad, the one who's the addict, you start thinking this mom is sicker than the dad. And these kids,
Oh,
these three teenagers that sit on the couch, oh my God, we got
oh,
work to do. So
I know.
sometimes I'm like,
I know.
okay, I just take a few breaths internally and go, all right, we'll get through this. You're here for a good reason. So
Oh God, I shared this story once. I went on a 12-step call. I've shared this a few times on the podcast, but I went on a 12-step call one time, and the guy, the guy was a bad alcoholic, and he was in the house with his wife. And as soon as I met the wife, I didn't give a damn about the alcoholic. She was so, she was hurting so bad. She was beaten, and
yeah, you can see what the
she
disease does to the family members.
it was awful.
Yeah,
I'd never seen that was the first time I ever seen anything like that. And I swear to God, I said, you know what? I can't do anything for this guy.
yeah,
But we got her to an Al-Anon meeting,
yeah.
and that was actually the first Al-Anon meeting I've ever been to. I took her to this Al-Anon
Oh,
meeting,
okay.
and I was just amazed at how they just welcomed her into the fold.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
It was just the most beautiful thing. I don't know though whatever happened to her, if she ever went back to Al-Anon or not. I kind of doubt it. But that I got to
Well,
witness that was amazing to
yeah.
me to see
Well,
that.
I've
But it
had
just
that
shows you how messed
experience.
up.
Yeah, I've had that experience a number of times, and you know that if they get to Al-Anon, even if the alcoholic is going to relapse or not going to buy in, the shift that happens in that family member by going to Al-Anon and meeting other people and starting to see there's a program for her or him, the shift that happens is huge. And
Yeah.
working with the family members, when I work with them for 6 months, John, it's almost like you become part of the family. And when we're
Yeah, I
saying
bet.
goodbye when we say goodbye on our last call, sometimes very emotional because I've gotten connected to these people and the family has done such good work together
Yeah.
that it's really cool. And even some of the non-addicts that make commitments, I had a dad text me about a year after he had made a commitment because all the people in the family said, "Hey, Dad, even though you're not the addict here, you smoke a lot of pot. Why don't why don't you make that one of your commitments?" For Jack's asking everybody to make 3 commitments here, and he's looking around and he goes, "All right, 90 days, no pot." I said, oh, to my note taker, okay, would you put down Dan is not going to no pot for 90 days. Well, a year later, Dan, who we became friends through this process, texted me 1 year later, and he said he calls himself the Dan Man. He's the dad. He says, "Hey Jack, I just want you to know the Dan Man, no pot for 1 year.
Wow.
He only committed
Pretty
to
cool.
90 days, but he
Yeah.
must have seen that there was some benefits to his health and to he was 60 years old and smoking pot daily. His family said, "We know you're not the alcoholic here, but you smoke a lot of pot, Dad, don't you think? Maybe this could be one of your commitments." One is quit smoking, one is change your eating habits. I mean, I have like 20 different things that I let people pick from. Say, well, what do you think would help you? Forget your daughter. What would help you to make your life better and to grow and to stretch yourself? And so I get everybody doing different behaviors and then holding them accountable. I kind of become a coach after that first meeting.
Yeah. It's amazing. I don't know if there's a person in this country who hasn't in some way been affected by alcoholism, either that it's someone in their family or someone that they know. Just today at work, I was talking to a woman I work with, and she was telling me this horrible story about a friend's daughter friend's daughter who was a nurse and and now has dementia from drinking.
Mm.
Got her drinking is so bad she's got dementia, and she's lost everything. And and anyway, she went through this whole story telling me about this woman, and I just thought to myself, God, it's just everywhere. It's just everywhere.
It is.
You
Well,
know?
that's why we say the family is the patient and the patient's the family,
Yeah.
because the effects of one alcoholic 60-year-old guy I worked with last year, I mean, he devastated not only his wife, his daughters, and the daughters' kids. I mean, he was coming to Little League games drunk, and then he would sit in a folding chair and he would tip over and he couldn't get up. And I mean, the little 8-year-old kids are playing baseball, and there's my grandpa laying on the ground
Yeah.
drunk. I mean, and now
Wow.
they're saying you can't see your grandkids, yeah, until you have 90 days of sobriety, because you can't do this anymore. My kids can't be around you. So
Mm,
the devastation that ripples through the family is, whew, it's huge.
yeah.
And then if you go back generations, that's part of my workshop part in the first hour, is to say, let's take a walk in time and kind of go back. What about grandma and grandpa? What about their parents? What was going on back then? And they're kind of all sitting on the edge of their seat, like learning about their family history through a genogram that I do.
Yeah.
And the suicides that are there,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
the mental illness that's there. And my purpose is, hey, if everybody decides today is the day we're all going to start doing things for health, and changing and shifting the family dynamic here, you can shift the generation after generation, because you can stop the madness. Your grandparents
Absolutely.
and their parents didn't really know a lot, and the mental illness and the suicide and the alcoholism, and that you can see it's rippled through the whole family, and that's why we do those genograms. It's important for them to
Yeah.
see that.
Interesting. I'm so glad I asked you about this. I
Yeah,
find that really interesting, and I like the way that you approach the intervention with the
yeah,
family.
very
It
different
just
than what
sounds.
most people know.
It makes sense.
Even
My
even
wife and I.
people even people like psychologists and therapists that I talk to, and doctors who want to learn more. I've done a couple of workshops for therapists, and they're like, "Wow, this is great. I always thought interventions where you ambush the person, and I don't really
Yeah.
like that. That's lying, and
No.
ooh." But professional community therapists and people like that, a lot of them don't even know this is available. They think intervention's a bad
Uh-huh.
word.
Yeah. The other model is good for television, though.
Oh yeah, yeah. When they tell the addict, I'll give you all you need. Just let us know what you're doing.
Right.
It's crazy,
Right.
crazy.
Well, I really enjoyed this. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about, or that you would like to talk about before we head on out?
Well, I think I read a book that I was really thrilled about 10 years ago called Why Christianity Must Change or Die
Oh.
by John Shelby Spong. And he is a bishop in New Jersey that realized that Christianity, because more and more people are leaving the Christian faith, is such a profound book. But makes me think about AA.
Mm-hmm.
Why, if the title is changed to Why AA Must Change or Die, I think that Glenn Rader's book, Modern 12-Step Recovery, is a key to, like, this John Shelby Spong book about Christianity. Because again, Christian churches, they're closing all over. In global, Christian churches are closing huge. And then Christian church attendance, Catholic is for various reasons, a lot of times from the behavior of the
Mm-hmm.
people, the priests and things like that. But the giving at those churches is way down, and people are leaving. I know a lot of people have left organized religion, but I think about that with AA. Why AA must change or die, and I think if we're still going to use the big book, and we're still going to use the 12 and 12, and not open our minds to the idea that, we can integrate both. For you people that want to live in a religious belief system, that's great. But the
Go for
people
it.
who are the other way, we need to allow them to sit right next to us and be okay. but
It,
people are scared to death to open their mouth in a
it,
conventional AA meeting. So you asked if there's anything I mean, that's something that I think we need to, I mean, I'm 45 years old, I'm 65 years old. What's it going to look like 50 years from now? Where's AA going to be?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm concerned because I love the program. I grew
Me
up
too. Me
in
too.
the history
Me
of the
too.
program. I still go. I still love so many people in the program.
If it
And
does survive, I think it will survive without the big book. Eventually, people are going to let that damn thing go. I mean, after a while, it gets ridiculous. I mean, it would be like giving you a book that was written in 1850. When you were starting out, it's just it's just kind of crazy. Anyway,
or Christians that follow the Bible too, because the Bible, you're going to believe what a guy said way back
I
then,
know,
which
I
has
know.
no clue. Yeah. So
Yeah. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. I'll have to have you back on again sometime. We'll talk about something else.
okay.
So,
Yeah, I appreciate the great work you're doing, John. I
oh,
appreciate your mission.
I love it. It's fun.
Glad I found you.
And that is another episode of Beyond Belief Sobriety. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Jack, for being here. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was great, and that intervention is really interesting. I like it. I like it a lot. But hey, if you'd like to help out our podcast, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can go become a patron over at patreon.com/Beyond Belief Sobriety, or you can just go to our website, beyondbeliefsobriety.com, and either click on the buy us a coffee, give us a buck or two, or just donate through PayPal. But if you can't do any of that, that's okay too, because I like podcasting. I like talking to people in recovery, and I will always do this for as long as I want to.